I'm super excited about tonight's lesson. It's going to cross all the different question types and content areas of the GRE. So it'll be quant and verbal, right? Rules based and strategy. So I'm really excited. Without any further ado, let's get going. So the plan is to work through quite a few problems. And those problems are going to come from the 5-pound book. It's available through us directly or, of course, on Amazon. A great resource given how few GRE questions actually exist out in the world. You've got over 2,000 realistic GRE problems all here for you. Nice. So when I say that the topic is going to cover everything, all topics that could be seen on the GRE, there's really only one thing that'll do that, and it's flashcards. So do me a favor, I want you to choose, I think you can set it to panelists and attendees. So I want you to change the settings and write it out to panelists and attendees. And I want you to say, tell me, what do you guys think about when you think flashcards, right? So what's the first thing that comes to mind when it comes to the GRE and you think flashcards? For sure. Let's see, how many other folks? Memorizing, yeah, vocab, math formulas. You can repeat what somebody's already said, right? I want to hear from everybody. What's the very first thing that comes to mind when you think flashcards? And absolutely, definitely +1 people here, right? Like definitely consider +1ing. Convenience, vocab, memorizing for sure. You probably think, most people think vocab and maybe like geometry, like rules and formulas. And that's true, right? That's true that we are going to use flashcards for vocab and for our rule-driven practice. You don't remember the formulas for 30, 60, 90 triangle, make a flashcard. You don't know the meaning of the word, punctilious, make a flashcard. Or you get a word list and make a flashcard. You get a geometry cheat sheet and you make a flashcard. We're going to do those. I want to look at how to be a little bit more effective with the flashcards that we already know and love. So the formula flashcards, the vocab flashcards. But then we're going to spend the second half of this session talking about how to make what Amy called strategic, but not drilling. We're going to work on strategy flashcards. We're going to work on recognition flashcards. And so this recognition flashcard, just to kind of plant the seed, is going to be the practice in how to recognize problems faster, how to recognize techniques to use on certain problems. So it's not about what's the formula for the area of a triangle, or like what are the degrees in a 5-sided figure. This is more the when I see a problem that has this trait, or when I see this language, or when I see this sort of pattern, I want to think fill in the blank. Now we're going to do quite a few because I want you to see a variety of different sort of code activities. That said, none of what we're going to see tonight is the compendium. There are hundreds of these kind of like tricks that when you see this certain language in a problem, maybe not hundreds, but at least into the hundred. Little tricks, if I see this, if I recognize this, then I want to try this. And you'll encounter them as you study. So we'll talk about that, how you're going to find these triggers in the first place. But let's start with a nice, easy exercise that I think most of us feel more comfortable with when it comes to flashcards. And it's honestly the one sort of unifying effect. It's our one big unifier for all of verbal. Right? So I want you guys to try this fill-in question. So this text completion question. Your job is to read the sentence, and then you're going to choose the one word that fits in that blank. When you think you might have an answer, why don't you send that into the chat, what you think the answer to this question is. Nice, guys. So I'm getting a lot of different answers, but we're starting to settle in on A. The next thing I want you guys to tell me, I want you to type in the window if any of the words in the answer choices or up in the sentence, did any of those words give you any trouble at all? Like maybe you didn't feel great about the meaning of the word. Yeah, so I got euphemistically, garrulous, precocious. Sometimes people aren't super comfortable with skittish. Okay. What about this one? I want you to try another sentence. We're going to come back to these, I promise. We'll come back to them all. But I want you to try another one. Try this one. And again, I want you to tell me. So start typing in the chat window. What word or words gave you trouble? What words got you on this one? Yeah, parsimony, pulchritude, pedantry, dogmatic, maybe even. All the P's. Yeah, right? Oh my gosh. A lot of tricky vocab words. We'll try one more. We'll try one more. All right. And then again, I want you to tell me, were there any words in this one that gave you trouble? And it's not always just words in the answer choices. Sometimes it's words in the sentence itself. Yeah, anachronistic, caustic, acerbic, abstruse. Right? Like we might think obtuse, but that's not with an A or an S or a T. It's not any of those. Yeah. So part of what I wanted you guys to see is that as you do practice problems, right, as you take practice tests, you're going to start to encounter words that you don't know. And there are a lot of techniques for managing that on test day. And in fact, we've got some great ones in other previous prep hours. Today, we're not talking about how do I work around the vocab I don't know, right? Today, we're talking about how do I learn more of this vocabulary and how can I be kind of efficient and effective with it? Because that's the thing, is that we often run into vocab that we don't know. So we make all these flashcards and then we spend forever studying them. And what I'd like for you is to find a way of being more effective. So the first thing I want to look at is the traditional definition flashcard. How do you feel? How are you liking the flashcard? Christina, that's really nice to call it too wordy. That's like generous. I wonder if anybody's got any more. It's not engaging. What else? It's definitely not engaging. Are there any big problems, you think? Yeah, it's gonna be super difficult to remember. Also, if I don't know what vituperative means, right? Like, I don't know what vituperative means, and I'm going to define it with vituperation. Right? Super hard to comprehend. Oh my gosh, super hard to understand. So one of the things we're going to look at is a technique for making memorable flashcards. I think it was Jessica pointed out, you know, flashcards work initially, but they're hard to recall later if we're not internalizing it. So we're going to come up with some rich and memorable flashcards. right? So ones that are easy, but we're going to create them ourselves, and they'll make it easier to follow. So a couple of little things to note. We're going to include things like simple synonyms. And the reason for that is that on test day, you're going to be coming up with a word that is appropriate for that blank. We call that coming up with a fill-in. Right? So as you read the sentence, you're going to decide for yourself, okay, this is the word, or this is the meaning for this blank. And that meaning is going to come out in words that you're comfortable with, because you're going to come up with it. So you'll either find the word somewhere else in the sentence and kind of copy it, or you'll use a simple word that you're already familiar with. Your job is then to look down into the answer choices and see which word or words, depending on the question, matches what you said the meaning of that blank was. And so if you know the simple synonyms for the words in the list, then you know if they match your word or not. So we're going to include things like that simple synonym or definition. And then a plus, minus, or equal sign, and well, actually, I like to even include color on the front in terms of the tone of the word. So if the word is more of a positive word, a negative word, or a neutral word, and they can kind of go either way, or it doesn't have much of a tone at all. We're then going to write some sort of mnemonic, so some memory device, try and make it emotional, try and connect to it, use a creative sentence, or equate the word with someone you know, or a job you've had, or anything. Right? Try to equate it with something that you already have like meaning with. And then another fun add here is to add your, connected GRE words as you learn them. In fact, a really nice flashcard is a flashcard that has the simple synonym on the front and a list on the back of all the words that mean happy, all the words that mean talkative, all of the words that mean disappointed, all of the words that mean angry and easily ready to fight. Because a lot of GRE words are in those same kind of emotion or meaning families. All right, so we'll go this route. Yeah, exactly. And so great question. Jessica just asked about well, what about words that have different meanings, right? Multiple meanings. Then I would put very clearly on the front and like a plus and a minus, so that I know that there is a positive and a negative meaning here, right? So I might write that word, but in two colors. I might write it in red and then write it in green. So for example, vituperate, right? I might make my flashcard about the root, not vituperation, not vituperative, but I'll just go find vituperate. Because at the end of the day, the part of speech doesn't actually matter, because you'll never be tested on the part of speech. So it's not nearly as important, right? So vituperate is very much a negative word, right? And some words are more clearly negative or positive. So vituperate is to scold or to criticize or to blame someone. There is no positive aspect to vituperate. And so for this one, we definitely turn it red. An example of how words can mean similar things but take on very different tones. So a little bit the opposite of what you were saying, Jessica. So rather than one word that has different tones, this is multiple words that mean sort of synonymous things, but with a difference in tone, right? Infamous, notable, acclaimed. Which one of those words is neutral? Which one is neutral? Meaning it could go either way. I could use it positively or negative. Yeah, notable, right? You could be notable for good things. You could be notable for bad things. Notable just means noteworthy. But what about infamous? Yeah, infamous is definitely negative. Like you're infamous for not good things. And these are like serial killers and outlaws are infamous. Whereas acclaimed is very clearly positive. When someone is acclaimed, we always say, that's a positive thing. The next piece is to start to add this layer of deep encoding. So this mnemonic memory device, this connection to a sentence or a person that you know. For example, vituperate. Or if you are familiar with the word berate, you might say vituperate, so that when I see that word, that's what I try to remember, right? Vituperate. Or maybe I think of like one of those, kind of infamous basketball coaches used to like scream and yell and like throw chairs. And you could, sort of build it on that person. Like the coach continued to vituperate the team, right? And with abusive talk, and sort of connect this word vituperate to that individual. Try to bring them together. So this idea of deep encoding. And then as you learn words that are related, I like to add them to the back of other cards so that they pop up more frequently. So these are some very much GRE words, right? Castigate, denigrate, revile. These are all very GRE worthy words that mean a lot of the same thing that vituperate means. Yeah, so when you say rewording, you mean rewording from the word to a more kind of neutral synonym? Oh, oh, no. I see what you mean. So like by saying vituperate instead of vituperate, yeah. Right. Well, and so that's the thing is for something like obtuse versus abstruse, you're going to need to come up with a memory trick that makes it clear which one's which, right? So the memory trick on that one might be less like, what the heck does this word mean? And more of the like, please, dear Lord, don't let me pick the wrong one, right? So if we've got abstruse, right? So let's try this one together. Let's see if we can come up with some mnemonics for these, because I think this is a good one. So we've got obtuse. And we've got, and they definitely do not mean, in most cases, the same thing. All right, so let's start to build our flashcards. So we're going to go ahead and build one now. We'll build one for this one. I want you guys to, you're online, right? So I want you guys to either go to like dictionary.com, or if you're on a Mac, you can open the dictionary app. But what I want you guys to do is I want you guys to open up a definition for obtuse first. Okay, so we're going to make the card for obtuse first. So obtuse is on the front of our card. And I want you guys to help me figure out what's going to go on the back of our card. So let's see what you guys come up with. What goes on the back of our vocab card? Someone that's obtuse might be insensitive. That's a nice, easy synonym. Slow. So we've got one definition that's sort of like insensitive and slow to get it. There's also, yeah, if you think about the math version of it, and you can think about math, it means like a wide angle, but more than that, it means, it kind of stems from that as this idea of blunt. Yeah, I like that, Victoria, like not sharp. Which, if you start to think about this, right, and I don't know that I'd worry so much about the wide angle, but notice that when we call someone slow to understand, we also tend to say that they're, you know, not super sharp. They're not on it. And so there is this kind of connectedness to meaning. Yeah, so obtuse. And then we've got abstruse, which, thanks, Kiki, this one means difficult to understand. Or obscure, if you're familiar with that. Right? If you're not familiar with that, don't use it. Don't put words on the back of your card that you don't know. Right? Thesaurus are great for stuff like this. Right? And so some words you might eventually add, if you didn't know obscure, you might add that one. You might add arcane to the back of your card at some point. But you can also like difficult to understand, obscure, puzzling. That's a word that might be a little bit easier to follow. It might be a word you're more, you know, used to using. Something is puzzling or confusing. Another one I like for this one actually is cryptic. But notice we're trying to come up with words that allow us to see the difference. Convoluted would make it more confusing. But as long as you sort of understood, convoluted can be puzzling and cryptic. So yeah, I don't think it's that far off. Esoteric. Yeah, again, if esoteric is a word you're familiar with. Right? If it's not, if you were to read esoteric and think like, I don't know what that means, don't put that on the back of your card. Right? Okay, so we've got obtuse on the front, abstruse on the back. What do you guys think about the tone of these two? Would you make one of them positive or negative? I'd definitely make obtuse negative. Yeah. And yeah, I think like abstruse isn't super, oh, that was not supposed to be green, guys, sorry. Obtruse isn't super positive either. Like for things to be arcane or difficult to understand, that's not great, right? So I might turn both of them red. So they are in fact both negative. The question though now is, let's get this sort of scooched up. How do I want to remember them? Because I need to remember that they're not the same. So what do you think? What is a mnemonic device? What could we use to compare obtuse to try and remember them? I love that. Obtuse slow, obtuse turtle. I like it. Oh, Kensley, obtuse means oblivious. Oh, and I love that. Shiki had the same. Those are beautiful, right? So here we go. We could do obtuse equals oblivious. And now you want to oblivious, Olivia. Right? Create your obtuse Olivia. Your obtuse, oblivious Olivia. And picture her in your mind. She's like, she'd be Olivia or Oliver, however you want to go, or any other name. But picture her in her mind as like taking forever and not quite getting it, and you know, like whatever, like build that story. Obtuse. Another one that'll help folks with obtuse sometimes is that they do remember that it's a math word. And so when you think about a math word, that might help you think about like blunt and, you know, not sharp, right? Or like wide, right? Big wide angle. So it might help you to tell that obtuse. I love abstruse, right? Abstruse as abstract. There is also, if you Google online, there's also the Mnemonic dictionary where folks will make their own suggestions. So typically for flashcards, I actually make physical ones because I like the act of actually writing. There are a couple of good ones. I know Anki does a decent job because you want one that kind of serves them up at random intervals. So if you can find, here's your tip. I don't love pre-made ones, Lily, because if I use a pre-made flashcard, then I didn't try to build the connection to the word. They are convenient, it is true. But pre-made means that I'm gonna have to study it probably twice as many times to get the understanding from it. So in the long run, it actually doesn't really save me much time because I'm gonna have to review that card a whole bunch. The thing I look up is I type in Lightner flashcards. Lightner and the Lightner method is a method of studying flashcards. It's how you can set flashcards at spaced intervals. And we'll talk about that right before the end of class. So obtuse, abstruse, make notes to yourself of the difference, right? So maybe your flashcards in those cases would be to highlight the specific differences. Because you might recognize it, like that's a place where you're gonna get confused or turned around. Cool. So here's what I want you to do. You're gonna take your first task, here it comes. Your first task is we're gonna choose 3 words. So for the first question that we did, we have precocious, euphemistically, garrulous, skittish. I want you to choose them, write them on your paper. Okay, you'll choose a word from the second one. Alienate, innervates, pedantry, parsimony, pulchritude, right? Write down any words you want. Abstruse streusel. Cool, yeah, cool, I like that one. An abstruse streusel. I wouldn't know how to make a streusel. You know, it's just so complicated. There's so many things that go into it, clearly. So something that's an abstruse streusel must be so hard to make. Must be so complicated. Not easy to follow. All right, so as you're choosing words from these lists, anachronistic, abstruse, right? We're choosing words from these lists. I want you to, now you're going to pick 2 of them. And you're going to make a flashcard. We're going to do it right now, right? So I want you to go online. I want you to find either I like the thesaurus, so I like the combination of the dictionary and the thesaurus. Pick your 2 words, and then we're going to put it in, and I'll give you, we'll take the first one back up. You're going to put it in the form of the word itself, some simple synonyms, and maybe you just sketch out a flashcard for right now on paper, and you can figure out how to add them later. You'll make a note of whether it was positive, negative, or equal. If you've got colored pens, those work well. Otherwise, you can just circle on the back, plus, minus, or equal. Write down a little quick creative sentence or a mnemonic device. And then the connected GRE words as you learn them. So let's take just a couple minutes. You'll see, you only need about a minute or 2 per flashcard. They don't take very long. And if you're finishing your flashcards, take one of them, pick one flashcard. I want you to type in the chat window all in one big block. So don't just keep hitting, like keep it all together. But what was the word? What was the synonym or 2? And what was your mnemonic device? What did you use to remember it? And so as you're finishing up one, or maybe you've started your second one, go ahead and tell us which word you chose. And what was the simple synonym? It could have been from any of the lists. Nope. Kiki, nope. We're getting ready to start doing math. We're doing both. Oh, parsimonious is stingy. Parsing out money. Parsimony. Right? So start to say it in your head. That's parsimonious. That means I only parse out little bits of money. I love that one, Amy. That's fantastic. I'm going to steal that one for class. You fear speaking your mind. Euphemisms, nice, cool. Or when you fear speaking your mind, that's great. So I have to use a euphemism instead. That's a great one too. Give me some more that I can steal. Tell my class to. Tell my tutoring to. I want some more, guys. Give me some other one. Precocious, premature. Cool. Garrulous, gabby, gabs all day. I love that one. Garrulous, excessively talkative. So good. Guys, these are amazing. Garrulous is negative, talking. I was very garrulous as a kid, so thinking of it, attaching it to yourself. Like, let me think of me. I was garrulous. Right? I was. It's true, actually. My last name's Garner, so I always think like Garner, garrulous Garner. Anachronistic, old-fashioned, out of date, not appropriate for the time, right? Anachronistic, like a, chronological, crone, old crone. I like that one, actually. Fatima, that's a great one. Because that chrono does mean like, it means time. And that's why we get this like old chron is like old times. Yeah, it's beautiful. Nice, you guys. Okay, so we can keep on making our, standard vocab flashcards. You should be practicing vocab, but maybe step up your vocab game a little bit. Right? Step up your vocab game. All right, so let's talk quant for a second. All right, let's talk quantitative for a second. There are often some like formulas that you just have to learn. You just have to know them, right? There's no choice. And when we do that, we often will put on the front of a card like area of a triangle and, central degrees on a circle and arc length and what have you. I'm going to offer a different suggestion. So you might have those as well. You might have these like formula flashcards where the front of it literally says like area of a triangle. And so these you might put, like your kind of generic information on it. But what about, right, a flashcard that just has a triangle on the front of it? Any triangle on the front of it. So I want you to take a look through just a couple of these rules, just to kind of like get your mind going. You don't have to know the answers to any of these, right? But this is just to get you thinking about like, what's the information we know about triangles? What sorts of things do we know about triangles? So now you might make a flashcard for each one of these images, right? So you might make a flashcard that actually has this triangle that has 4 and 5 on it with the degrees, with the lines, and a little note that says type of triangle. And on the back, you answer that question. What I'd say is if it's something like geometry or any math, really, don't write out the rule on the front. Like don't ask, area of a triangle. Draw the triangle, draw a line in, and then ask area ? Experience the math the way you'll see it on test day, right? You're going to see the triangle, and you might see the triangle with given tick marks on it or drawn in a very specific way. This is what we start to think of as like recognition or like know the code. So when I see this, I'm going to think this. And so things like an isosceles triangle, where the angles across from it are equal, right? Where the sum of all 3 angles in a triangle is 180 degrees. Where an equilateral triangle has all sides the same, and so all angles are 60. Right? In this case, these 2 angles would each have been 70 if you were sort of checking your work. And the area is 1/2 base times the height, or the perimeter is the measurement around the edges. So you might make an individual card for each one of these, but then I want you to consider the sort of like big recognition card. So what I'll draw on the front is, just a generic triangle. And then on the back, I'm going to start to write everything that I want to think about when I see a triangle. What are all the rules that I know? I know area, I know perimeter, I know total degrees is 180. I know that isosceles, right? And then you just keep going. And so what you're doing is you're starting to build these sort of like mega cards. So it's like when I see any triangle under the sun, I want to see what can I rattle off that I know about triangles, right? Do I know how to figure out the third side? Do I know how to find, one of the angles on the inside? Do I know how to find an angle built on the outside? And so this idea of like a bigger, like when I see a triangle, like anytime I see a triangle, I'm going to think this. And so you might start to write these down less as here's me memorizing the rules, but here's me quizzing myself to see what rules I can even remember on my own, right? Like I don't even see the rule being asked. I have to come up with them. The next one I really like for geometry, so let me get a little flashcard up for you. I love flashcards for compound shapes. I love it. I love flashcards for compound shapes. So imagine that you encounter a question and it looks like this. You see a big square with a circle drawn inside of it. And you're asked for the area outside the circle, but inside the square. What do you start to think of? What are some things that come to mind when you see these two shapes? Nice. So a couple of things come to mind, right? So some is strategy, right? Some is strategy, which is like layered shapes often mean that you're going to do something like add or subtract, or usually like find the difference, you know, subtract one shape from the other. Not uncommon. Yeah, and so then we've got also on top of this strategy, we've got rules, right? And so I might make some notes of what would apply here, right? So the circle, it might be the radius or the diameter, as many of you guys are saying, the length across. The diameter is equal to the length of one side of the square. So the diameter is the same length as the side of the square. Right? And then to add to that, circle, the radius is half that length. I might then also need formulas like area, right? So if I wanted circle area, I'd list that as pi r squared. And the circle or the square area is, you know, side squared, which is actually the same as the diameter squared. And so I might start to just think through the different connections. I put them all on the back of my card. And then as I flip through cards, it's like, all right, what do I think of when I have a triangle inside of a circle? What do I think about when there's a circle drawn on a coordinate plane? What do I think about when there's a crazy shape, but like parts of it are cut out? What do I think about when I think about a square with a diagonal? What do I think about when I see an equilateral triangle and they ask for the area? Right. And so the thing is that you're going to start to think about the more complex versions of geometry, because sure, you're going to need to use these formulas on test A, but the test itself is it's an added layer of complexity. Right? It's not just knowing the formulas, it's seeing when which formulas apply. And so these become your strategy style flashcards. Right. So the strategy being like, well, when I see this, what sorts of rules often apply? What rules do I need to be ready to use? What techniques are possible for me here? Okay, let's look at a different kind of problem. Not geometry, still math though. Still math. This is a DQ problem. And it's a problem where you, on average, want to be taking about, let's call it 2 minutes. So I'm going to give you guys 2 minutes. Feel free to shoot me an answer as soon as you think you've got it. No, this is not a multi-select. This is a just one, only one. So I got a ton of different answers. A ton of different answers. Do me a favor, type in the chat window, how did you solve it? So give me the like one sentence description of how you solved this. What'd you do? Trial and error, okay. Let's plug in some values. Tried to choose numbers. Nice. It wasn't sure, like X could be even or odd. Holy cow, what am I gonna do? Nice, well, I love this. I saw several of you guys say, I tested out some numbers. I tested out some numbers. Turns out there's a really, really good clue in the problem that would indicate that plugging in some numbers and using this elimination is a phenomenal technique. And it's this language of must be true. So when problems say things like, which of the following must be true? Which of the following is always this? Which of the following is never this? Which of the following could be this? It's this like proof language. When I see that language, I want to think, plug in my own numbers. Right? Like I might even make a flashcard of that. And not might even, I will. Right? And so I would make my flashcard. I'd put some or all of the problem on the front of it. And then on the back, I'm going to list, what am I going to think? I'm going to think pick numbers. In a sense, this is sort of the equivalent if you've been working on QC of trying to actively prove that you don't have enough information. Right? But now I've made a flashcard that's like, hey, when you see this, try this. When you see this must be true language, think about picking numbers. And it can go pretty quickly. We can pick pretty easy numbers. So for example, I like in the window, somebody had mentioned X is 1 and then X is 2, nice and simple. I mean, heck, you could even choose 0 and 1. 0 is even. That makes some of these really easy, right? As you practice with these, start to practice with super simple numbers. But you've got 3, you've got 5, you've got 11, 12, 11, and 6. 0 is an integer. It is not positive or negative, but it is an even integer. Yep. So which of these must be even? Well, I can tell you right now that A, B, and D are not even in this case. So it must not be the case that they must be even. So now when I test the next one, I only have to look at C and E. So if I were to test 2 here, it would be 4 plus 10 plus 6 is 20. Here it would be 6 plus 3 is 9, and that takes out the next one. So picking numbers for problems like this, when we see this like must be even language, can make it nice and easy to get through them a little faster. So again, the point here is to then make a flashcard for it. Make a flashcard. What about, let's try another that's a technique. What about a problem like this one? So I'm going to give you a minute and a half. It's a little faster than normal, but just to get you started. Nice, you get a calculator on test day, right? For sure, you'll have a calculator during the quant portion. And so if I remember how to solve, right, percents, the sales in the first quarter would have been this area. And so that would be 18% of 1.2 million, which I could calculate. I could 0.18 and multiply it by 1, and then a bunch of zeros, and then calculate it. Or when I see answer choices that are this spread out, I'm gonna think estimate. So what's 20%? Well, 10%, if I wanted to go that route, would be 120,000. So 20% would be double that. So around 200,000. Alternatively, you could look at some of these answers and think of the real story. If you were about to give me 20% of $1 million, you better not hand me a check for $216,000, $2,000, or even $21,000. $21,000 is not 20% of $1 million. And you're definitely not going to give me more than $1 million. So what's something I want to learn from a question like this when I work on it? All right, so let's say I worked on this question. I want to make myself a card, right? I see this question, blah, 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 and the spread out answer choices. So I might actually literally write that on my card, blah, 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 and the spread out answer choices. And then I'm going to write on the back, spread out ACs equal estimate. And that's true even if they don't say approximately. If they say approximately, you're absolutely going to estimate. But if they don't even say it, I do a lot more estimating than most people. So every time you work on a problem and maybe you're flipping through a solution and the solution says, this is a great problem for estimation, and you didn't estimate, that's when you might want to make a flashcard. What were the clues that whoever solved that problem for the explanation, what were the clues that they noticed that told them that estimation was going to be a powerful technique? It might also be something that's just like overly simple. For example, your gut reaction, if you were to see this QC problem where you're trying to decide which quantity is bigger, the quantity in A, the quantity in B, right? What do you think the trap is, guys? Well, I would say that the trap is that if you've got X on one side and 2 times X on the other, then obviously isn't 2 times X bigger? And that's the huge trap. And a lot of you guys are saying this to me in the chat window. Like, it's a big trap to look at and be like, oh yeah, 2 times X is always bigger. What about negative numbers? What about when X is 0? Right? That's one example of it. What about this problem? So the correct answer for that would be D. Because if X is 0, they're equal. If X is negative, quantity A is actually bigger. If X is positive, quantity B is bigger. So I can't tell. All right, what about this problem? There we go. What do you guys think? Did you read through it? What's the easy answer? What's the gut reaction? Like, yeah, like C. We drove one speed at 50, the other speed at 60. The average is clearly the 55 right in the middle, right? Obviously. Obviously. Beware of obviously. You should never, ever, ever just pick the obviously answer. Doesn't mean you're not going to inevitably pick it, but you can't pick it right away. Because in fact, the answer is not C here. This, Davis drove the same distance, but at a slower speed the first half and a faster speed the second one. Actually, what that means is that Davis took longer on the first half of the trip, so spent more time going slow. And so because Davis was spending more time going slower than he was going faster, it brings down his average speed. So in this case, quantity B is actually the bigger one, which is why we want to be so careful of that like overly simplistic answer, the too obvious, right? So again, I might put this on the cover of a card as a reminder of, oh my gosh, okay, that's really obvious. It's super obvious. And so what do I want to think or do when I see something too easy, right? If the solution seems obvious for QC, I'm going to slow down and prove it. I don't want to just pick the obvious answer. But this card actually works as a suggestion for another cool QC strategy that can be useful to make cards for. Another example of it, I'll show you. Give this one a try. I'll give you a minute and a half on this one. So I want you to take a moment and notice what this problem and the one we just did before have in common. On the surface, they definitely have this idea of like per things, like per hour, wage, per whatever, story problem. But what else do they have in common? What else do you notice? This was the previous one. And this is our current one. What quality do they have in common? Yeah, B has this like fixed number, right? So there'll always be like content connections from problem to problem. And so that might be for a lot of these. We did a lesson a couple months ago on weighted averages. And a lot of times weighted average problems don't look like weighted average problems. They sound like mixtures or something completely different. And so it can be really useful to build a flashcard that would say, hey, this is how I know this type of problem is mixtures. This is how I can tell that this is a great problem for drawing a picture. But yeah, we're comparing a really simple value for B with a more complicated value for A. Now, if we look back at our, too obvious, our Amityville, I didn't have to actually calculate the average speed because I was able to play off of B. I could cheat off of B. That B is the dead in the middle number, right? So if, 50 miles an hour one direction, and then 60 miles per hour the other direction, right? This 55 seems like it's this weird, like perfect average. And it's like, well, hold on. No, if I start to think about the story, Davis drives this distance longer, like for more time. And if that's true, if Davis is spending more time at 50 miles an hour, then that's likely going to pull the average down, which then puts me at answer choice B, right? B is going to be greater than quantity A. So I never calculated the average speed. I just calculated it relative to B. Right? B became my cheat off B. You can also do that same thing here, right? It's the same idea and similar setup. I can try and cheat off B. So if I've got one town that makes $45,000, the average salary, and one town that makes $55,000 as its average salary, well, quantity B says 50, boom, right in the middle. Well, what would it take for the two towns to have the average? Well, they'd have to be the same size. And the fact is that town X is smaller than town Y over here, which is the bigger town. So if Y is the bigger town, it's going to drag the average its way. So the average is going to be something less than 50,000, which means quantity B is going to be bigger. So again, we're like testing against B. And this isn't just in average problems. This is in all kinds of different problems. All right, I want to show you one more question. Right, and some of these can totally be for like all sorts of a variety of techniques. Right, so you could write them for exponent problems. For example, I'll just highlight a few of them, right? So you can see, right? If I've got a question that's got exponents and variables in my exponents, I might want to think, hey, I have to get my bases equal so that I can set my exponents equal to one another. And maybe I'll even list out my exponent rules on the back. I might also notice that a problem is talking about odds and evens, right? Like we saw before. And so I might make a note that this isn't just must be true. It's also this idea of odds and evens. It's number properties. In fact, a cool rule that people don't ever usually know. So take 30 seconds to kind of familiarize yourself with this problem. So I know a lot of times folks get stuck on inequalities, especially when I've got a system of inequalities. Did you know that if I have a system of inequalities, I can write them? So I'm gonna have to turn this one around. And so instead of it written in that direction, I'll have to write it the other way. So just kind of turn everything. But if I do that and I stack two inequalities on top of one another, I'm allowed to add them. I have to add them, but I'm allowed. And so I've got 2a plus another a, that's 3a on this side plus b. On the right-hand side, I have a 7 and a 2, that's a 9 plus b. Turns out I can subtract that b from both sides, and now I'm solving a system without plugging in a million numbers. I get that a is bigger than 3, and that means quantity a is bigger. Let's say you were like, wait, what, Whitney? I'm sorry, you can add inequalities? That's a thing, right? And you read the explanation, and you're like, oh my God, I never knew that. Well, you know what you're gonna do? You're gonna put the question on the front of a card. And you're gonna say, when I see two inequalities or a system of inequalities, I'm gonna stack and I'm gonna add, right? I'm gonna see what cancels. I'm gonna make sure the jaw faces in the same direction, right? So these flashcards can be a phenomenal way to practice rules, but again, not just like, I'm allowed to add inequalities. I'm allowed to do this. This is a math technique. This is how you solve a system of equations. This is how you solve for a variable and exponent. Instead of just trying to memorize that, make a flashcard from a question where you encountered it so that you can like bring that connection to it. And here's the last one, I promise. This isn't just for quant problems. I want you to give this problem a go. All right, so I'm starting to get some answers coming in. This is one of my favorite types of reading comprehension questions. It's an inference question. Inference meaning draw a conclusion. And so there are a lot of ways that the GRE might tell you inference. They might use the word, right? Which of the following statements can be most properly inferred from the information? Or these statements would support which of the following? Or the one we just saw, which follows most logically from the argument? I would put that language on the front, especially if the language was confusing and you didn't think inference when you saw it. Now, here's the thing about a GRE inference. It means we're going to draw our own conclusion, and there's very strict rules. If I'm going to draw my own conclusion, I don't get to use any real world knowledge. I don't want to be very extreme in my language. I really should not be making predictions about the future. And I need to be really careful about assigning blame or cause, right? Because I don't always know why something happened. I just see that it happened. And so if I know that for inference questions, my job is to avoid things like that strong language, real world traps, or trying to make predictions. And I know that I'm meant to choose that like sort of squishy, soft, easy to prove language, because my answer has to be proven directly from the passage. Then it makes this kind of question a million times easier. Right? We've got a passage that's talking about January 2015 and January 2016. It's very specific. It's very narrow to this set portfolio of investments. We had better not try to draw any conclusions about the general positives and negatives of stocks or bonds. Those things might be true in the real world. Stocks might be better investment. Bonds might typically grow less rapidly. Stocks might be riskier than bonds. But this is a passage about a very specific set of portfolio investments. Can I then make some prediction about whether it's going to continue to increase? No. The only soft and subtle language here is, okay, we can follow this math. We can calculate it. We can read it. So now knowing that just knowing that the passage that's hidden here is an inference passage, I want you to go through these answer choices and I want you to pick the one or two answers that you think are the most likely. Yeah, I will, Victor. I'll go right back to that list again. Pick one or two answers that you think might be likely. Yeah, and it's this language, right? Thanks for sending in this language. Music education should not devote attention. That's kind of strong. Everyone, the number of proficient adult musicians is likely less than it could be. That's kind of nice. That's pretty squishy. Can I say that children are particularly sensitive to criticism from adults? Maybe. All children? Absolutely not. So sometimes just knowing, all right, I know I'm in an inference question, I can already start to think of answer choices that are going to be unlikely. So if I'm going to make a flashcard for it, I'll write those things down. What am I going to avoid? I'm going to avoid that really strong language. I'm going to avoid those real world traps. I'm going to avoid doing things like make predictions. What am I going to choose? I'm going to choose like soft, narrow, attached to the argument, definitely can prove it. Basically, you're like wallflower. You're Dullsville answers. And this is true for so many other of the reading comp question types, right? If I see a main idea question, here's what I want to think. If I see a specific detail, here's what I want to remember. If I see a strengthen or a weaken, or if I see boldface in a problem, this is what I want to think of. If I see a sentence correction question or a sentence equivalence question where I don't know any of the vocabulary words, what do I want to do? How do I want to react? When I see a sentence equivalence where I know all of the vocabulary words well, what's a technique that I can use? Right? And so what I want you to think about is as you're working through problems, use the individual problems that you do, not just to do a problem and cruise, and do a problem and cruise, and do a problem and cruise, but instead think about how you can take a lesson from that problem. What's the element? What's the piece that you're like, you know what, next time I see something that looks anything like this, that used this technique, that worked with the answer choices, that plugged in its own numbers, Whatever that like technique or that strategy or that thought process was, make a flashcard for that. Yeah. And you'll see, throw those into your same big set of like rule-driven flashcards. And you're going to be able to study the one thing that most people need the most, which is the ability to recognize what the heck to do, right? Almost all of my students know the rules. Problem is they just don't always see when to apply them. So that's what you'll use these recognition flashcards for. So speaking of all of those rules, all of those strategies, right? These are things that we for sure cover with all of our students, classes, private tutoring, our online interactive products. And so definitely check us out. You can always get a free trial of any of our session ones or a free trial of our GRE Interact by just going to our website, checking it out. Definitely come see us. And I want to wish you the very best of luck with your GRE studying. Again, my name is Whitney. It was a pleasure to be with you guys tonight. Happy Thanksgiving to those of you here in the US or those of you potentially celebrating abroad. I hope you have a lovely holiday, long weekend. Enjoy some of it. Don't just study the whole time. Maybe make a few flashcards. Oh, and side note, at holiday dinners, have people do vocab flashcards with you. They love it. It's their favorite thing. It's amazing how much people love to do vocab. Silly people. All right, guys, have a wonderful night. Take care.